Hi there, this is Bruno Bianchi Sarcone from Spainguru.es, and this is the Spanish Taxes Overview, Webinar 2026. This is the first webinar of 2026 after the new year. I hope you had a wonderful entry into 2026. And now we're going to start with the presentation. Remember, you can ask your questions in the chat box in the bottom right corner of your screen. Anytime during the webinar, just make sure to add a question mark at the end. A tiny bit about Spainguru.es. Our objective is facilitating relocation process for English-speaking foreigners to Spain since 2014. We have wonderful reviews on Trustpilot, almost 200 five-star reviews, and Spainguru's Google Business account. And you can use Spainguru.es for free. You can join my weekly newsletter that I send every Monday to more than 15,000 readers. You can watch the free YouTube channel with more than 1,000 videos, many of them about taxes, with almost 8,000 subscribers. You can read my articles, more than 2,000 in Spainguru's blog posts, and join the huge community Facebook groups with an aggregated total of 150,000 members, also subreddits with dedicated groups to immigration, lucrative visa, digital nomad visa, and so much more. Also on Spainguru, you can find the Move to Spain checklist with a step-by-step list of things that I recommend doing starting 1 year before your intended move date to Spain. Also, you can join my other free webinars, Non-Lucrative visa, moving to Spain, digital nomad visa, Q&A sessions with financial planners and with lawyers, and so much more. And if you want to engage with professionals, I have personally vetted immigration experts, tax advisors, financial planners, and so many more services like health insurances for Spanish visas and many more services that you may need. I highly recommend you at least engaging with tax professionals and with immigration lawyers if you're planning to move to Spain. And also a lot of people is asking me the difference between the different professionals or tax experts. So you have three tax advisors, you have tax accountants, or also known as gestores in Spain, and you have financial planners. So tax advisors is for strategy and planning. So they know the Spanish tax law or the US tax law or UK tax law and double tax treaties. They will make sure to set if you are potentially be deemed to be a tax resident in Spain, your implications for the different types of taxes like wealth tax, capital gains tax, income, etc. And tax accountants is more for filings, okay, and compliance. So they will do the tax returns like income tax or overseas assets declaration, etc. in Spain or in the US or maybe other countries where you're still a tax resident. And they will make sure that you file before the deadlines and that you are okay with the different obligations, okay? And then there is also the financial planner, okay, who look over your pensions, your investments, cross-border financial coordination, account custody, retirement, wealth planning, and so much more. So these three are different. They complement each other. At least engage with tax advisors if you're planning to move to Spain. This presentation is for general information only and it's not legal nor financial or tax advice. For personal guidance, please consult with a qualified advisor. You can find trusted experts on Spainguru.es. Spainguru is not liable for errors or outcomes from using this information. The objectives of this webinar is first, gaining an overview of Spanish taxes, preparing yourself for having more informed conversations with tax advisors, clarify the role of professional tax advice, and understand that this webinar will provide general information only and will not replace personalized tax advice, and identify key considerations for expats like compliance requirements, deadlines, and avoiding potential penalties. Let's talk first about Spanish tax residency. You become a Spanish tax resident in Spain, and therefore, if you become one, you pay taxes on your global income if any of these three conditions apply. The first one, if you spend over 183 days physically in Spain within a calendar year from January 1st to December 31st, the days don't need to be consecutive. The immigration status doesn't matter. Therefore, if you are in Spain for 2 months as a tourist, and then you come back to Spain later in the year and holding a visa, for example, or a residency, and you stay in Spain longer, both presence count. So your time as a tourist will also be counted. So be careful with that. The second condition is if your main economic source or income or economic activity is from Spain. For example, you own properties, you rent them out, and you have income from Spain. Or if your family lives in Spain, even if you spend less than 183 days in Spain. Okay? A crucial date to remember is July 2nd, because after July 2nd, there's only 182 days left in the calendar year. Therefore, if you arrive after that date on a certain tax year, you would potentially avoid tax residency if you haven't been any time before July 2nd, regardless of your immigration status during the same calendar year, right? So it's always very important that you do your calculations correctly, verify your travel records, and also sometimes when you move from one jurisdiction or country to another country, for example, Spain, there could be some, let's say, misunderstandings in between the tax authorities, and both tax authorities could consider you to be a tax resident in both jurisdictions. For that, it's also important to understand or know, okay, or consult with a tax advisor about double taxation agreements existing between Spain and the other country. Spain has tax agreements with 90 countries or more. Therefore, of course, they have with the USA, with the UK, with Canada, with Australia, and so much more. But basically, in those tax agreements, there will also be tiebreaker rules who will help tax authorities, let's say, understand when you become a tax resident in the different jurisdictions. Okay, so it is not entirely a black and white situation. It is also the consideration of the tax authorities who deem your situation and declare whether you are a tax resident or not. Okay. So what happens when you become a tax resident in Spain? You are subject to taxation on your worldwide income and potentially on the net value of your assets via the wealth tax and solidarity taxes. Okay. If you are a non-tax resident in Spain, but you have income coming from Spain, as I said, for example, you have properties in Spain, you rent them out, you pay taxes only on the income that you generate from Spain at different rates than if you are a Spanish tax resident. We mentioned that the tax year is a calendar year that goes from January 1st to December 31st, which is very different from the immigration year. The immigration year is not a calendar year, it is a natural year that starts typically when you start your residency in Spain. Therefore, if you, for example, obtain a non-lucrative visa from a consulate abroad that grants you a certain validity period of that visa, and you enter Spain during that validity period, once you enter Spain, you technically have 30 days to obtain your residency card in Spain, and the start date of that residency card should match the day in which you enter Spain, right? Which could be, for example, July 2nd. Therefore, your immigration year would start on July 2nd and will go to July 2nd the following year. Okay, so the overlap between those years could look like this. In the red bar, you have the tax years, as I said, are calendar years. But then if you move on July 2nd, then the natural year goes to the next July 2nd. Therefore, you are spending 182 days in the different halves of the tax years, and therefore you can play with Spanish tax residency, at least for the condition number 1 for becoming a Spanish tax resident. Of course, the different visas or residencies have their own minimum stay requirements that you need to pay attention to, but there are ways to also play with this. We're going to talk about that, specifically about the non-lucrative visa case. We mentioned that non-residents would pay taxes as non-residents to Spain only for the income source from Spain, and there are 2 categories. Whether you are an EU EEA resident, okay, you have there the tax rates for the different types of income, or if you are a non-EU passport holder, Typically, you would pay 24% for the most common types of income. For example, rental on a property you own in Spain, you would pay 24% as a non-resident, to give you an example. Now, let's talk about the different tax systems or regimes and the tax obligations in Spain. You have two types of regimes, the general tax regime and the special tax regime, or Beckham law. The general tax regime includes the personal income tax, wealth tax, solidarity tax, and the informative form 720. Okay? The special tax regime, also known as Beckham law, will have their own taxation and their own, let's say, advantages and disadvantages. Let's talk about eligibility. Generally, you have to be an employee, either working for a company abroad under the digital nomad visa or working for a Spanish company and moving for employment purposes. Typically, people who move to Spain as contractors, okay, are generally not eligible, okay? And I mention this because many people were sold that if they move as digital nomads as a contractor to Spain, okay, they were going to be eligible for the Beckham law and therefore pay only 24% tax on their employment. So this is not correct. There are advantages of being under the Beckham law. As I mentioned, 24% on your employment tax, which is very, let's say, very advantageous. And also other types of income. You wouldn't pay tax outside of Spain. You wouldn't have to submit the 720 form or declaring your overseas assets. You wouldn't have to pay wealth tax, etc., etc. But there are certain disadvantages. And because of these disadvantages, if you are making less than 55,000 euros of taxable amount, okay, per year income, then probably your tax advisor will recommend you just going under the general tax regime because you will be paying less taxes because of additional administrative burden, because there are no family deductions or allowances with the Beckham law, and many other things. Okay, so it is not all advantages about the Beckham law, and you need to study it with an expert tax advisor. Now let's talk about the first tax obligation. We mentioned the overseas assets reporting, also known as the Modelo 720 or 720 form. This is where you declare the existence of certain type of assets outside of Spain. When do you have to declare this? And of course, this is not a tax. This is just an information that you provide to the Spanish tax authorities once you become a Spanish tax resident. Okay, if you're non-resident, you don't have to do it. And as I said, if you're under Beckham law, you don't have to do it. But if you become a Spanish tax resident, the first year that you become, you have to declare the 720. When you have to declare it? Well, the assets and rights held abroad divided by categories, for example, bank accounts, investments, real estate or properties. If by category, for example, bank accounts, you have two bank accounts with 25,000 euros each, the total category of bank accounts is 50,000 euros. Therefore, you need to declare the existence of every bank account because the category is 50,000 euros or more. Okay, so as you can see, it is quite easy to go over the threshold, especially if we're talking about if you're owning property outside of Spain. Then you don't have to declare it every year, right? But if there are changes of more than 20,000 euros per category, or if there are asset closures, you need to declare it with the changes, okay? The deadline for this is quite soon. Actually, it's March 31st. And normally, if you work with a tax accountant or gestor, you will start working on this by January 1st. And also, cryptocurrencies, it is not part of the 720 form. It is the next one. It is the Modelo 721, where you also have to declare your holdings of cryptocurrencies as well. Now, let's talk about the second tax obligation, the income tax filing, or IRPF. There are two types of income, the ordinary income and investment income at different tax rates. The ordinary income is generally subject to progressive tax rates ranging from 19% to 47%. There is also a regional part and a national part, so there are slight variations, okay? And inside the ordinary income, you have salaries, rental income, business earnings. And inside investment incomes, you have dividends, interest, capital gains tax, which are taxed at lower rates than the ordinary income, and the range is from 19% to 30%. The deadline to file the annual income tax is June 30th. For example, on June 30th, 2026, I will have to declare my income for all the tax year of 2025, calendar year. And you also start to prepare it 3 months before if you work with a tax accountant, okay? Now, if you're autónomo, like me, okay, and this is a contractor, you also have to file your income taxes on a quarterly basis and other taxes too, okay? Now, U.S. citizens, as you know, if you're a U.S. passport holder, regardless of where you live, wherever you are as a tax resident, still you need to file and potentially pay taxes to U.S. tax authorities. And the deadline for this is April 15th. Now, if you live overseas, you have an automatic extension, okay, until June 15th, and you also can request another extension until October, mid-October, okay, paying the difference in interest, etc. Okay, so using the first extension, which is automatic, many people will file their taxes in Spain, and thanks to the double taxation agreement between Spain and the USA, you don't pay taxes on the same thing. Therefore, whatever you pay to Spain, for example, you pay income tax in Spain, this certain amount, you can credit it towards the payment of your income tax in the USA, making it effective payment to the US authorities zero, because you would be paying everything in Spain in what refers to income, right? So there is, let's say, a discussion between Americans, what makes more sense, to pay the income tax, to pay the taxes first in Spain and then in the US, or vice versa. And the answer is that it will depend on your case. Okay, it will depend on your case. In general, what I understand, it is easier to pay the taxes first in Spain, and then with whatever you paid in Spain, you will file your taxes in the US, and you will have to pay zero because taxes in Spain are generally higher than in the US. This is the general case. Now let's talk about how those progressive tax brackets work. And a lot of people, when they see the different income tax brackets specifically, they see this table on the right. Okay, as you can see, the first bracket, 19%, until the 6 is 47. If you see the fifth bracket, you will see that between 60,000 euros of taxable income and 300,000 euros, you pay 45% income tax, right? And this is why this man is asking, is it true I'll pay 45% tax for 100K income? Now, the answer is no, it's not true. Thank God you don't have to pay 45% tax. And the way it works is that progressively your tax rate will increase as long as you add more income. Okay, so for example, the way you can see it is for the first 12,450 euros that you earn, you will be paying 19% tax. For the next 7,500 euros, 24% tax, etc., until you arrive to 100,000 euros of taxable income, making it that you pay the, let's say, sort of average or median of those brackets. Therefore, the effective tax rate for 100,000 euros of taxable income is 36%, which is not 45%. Yes, and that's why they call them progressive rates, okay, or brackets. So you can see here in this table for the different types or different amounts of taxable income, the effective tax rates. For 30K of taxable income, you will be paying approximately 24% effective tax rate, going up to 36% for 100K of taxable income. This is only for illustrative purposes only, without having taking into account any allowances or deductions or anything else, right? So, and also this calculation, this way of calculating is you can apply it for many other taxes who also have progressive tax brackets, like, for example, the wealth tax or the capital gains tax, etc., etc. Now, let's talk about the third tax obligation, the wealth tax and the solidarity tax, okay? The wealth tax is a regional tax that is potentially applied to the net value of your assets anywhere in the world, okay? Now, it is a regional tax. Therefore, depending on where you live in Spain, you would be paying it or not. Okay. For example, depending on the thresholds in which this tax kicks in, you would pay it or not. Depending if there is a full rebate on the tax or not, etc., etc. Right? The general threshold for all the regions, let's say the central government proposes to all the regions that the general threshold is 700,000 euros net worth, okay? And then for everything over that, you will pay progressive rates for your wealth tax, okay? Now, there are some regions that have very favorable conditions, like Madrid and Andalusia, that, for example, let's say they don't have wealth tax. Cantabria, Extremadura, the same. And also there is the situation of Catalonia, which is probably the least favorable, with a low threshold of only 500,000 euros where this tax kicks in, okay? Valencia recently increased the threshold from 500,000 euros to 1 million euros in force from this year, 2026. Okay, so very important, you have to study with a tax advisor where you move in Spain if you think this could be a risk. Okay. Now, there's also something called the 60% rule, which limits your tax liability to 60% of your taxable income. Using this rule, you can reduce your wealth tax liability to up to 80%. In short, if the wealth tax plus the income tax is more than 60% of your taxable income, then you can reduce your wealth tax. Okay? This is especially important or interesting to know if you have a big net worth, but your income is in relation small. Okay? So this is something that you need to have in mind when you discuss with your tax advisor about the wealth tax implications. The wealth tax deadline, the filing is June 30th, which is the same day as for the income tax. And you also should start preparing it with your tax accountant 3 months before. Now, there is also a solidarity tax, which is a type of wealth tax, with the difference that this is a national wealth tax, okay? The good news are that it kicks in at a much higher threshold of 3 million euros, okay? Plus the allowance of 700,000 euros, right? So 3.7 million euros net worth. And then you will be liable potentially for paying the solidarity tax. So it doesn't matter where you move in Spain, you could be potentially liable for this tax if your net worth is over these quantities. Now, whatever you have paid as wealth tax, you can credit it towards the payment of the solidarity tax. So you can say that Madrid and Andalusia, for example, just have the solidarity tax because basically all of Spain has this. Here's a table which is quite complex. As you know, I'm recording this. I will send you the recording later on. And these are the conditions for the most common or most popular communities like Madrid, Andalusia, Valencia, Catalonia, Murcia, Basque Country, okay, for the wealth tax and solidarity tax. Let's look at a specific calculation. As we said, Catalonia is one of the least favorable regions with a threshold of only 500,000 euros allowance for the regional wealth tax. So imagine that your net worth is 1 million euros. One of the deductions that you can have if you own a property, yes, of more than 300,000 euros, you can deduct up to 300,000 euros from your taxable income. Therefore, we said that the threshold is 500,000 plus 300,000 euros deduction from your house. You can deduct from that million net worth 800,000 euros that are not taxable. Therefore, the taxable quantity left is 200,000 euros. You apply the progressive brackets, and that year you will be paying less than 500 euros in concept of regional wealth tax in Catalonia. Now, if your net worth is 1.5 million, you will pay 3,000 euros. If it's 2 million, 8,000 euros. If it's 2.5 million, 14,000 euros, right? And then over 3 million of taxable income, the solidarity tax would kick in, but whatever you paid for regional wealth tax, you can credit it towards that payment. Okay. Another comparison you can see here: Madrid, Valencia, and Catalonia. We said that Madrid effectively doesn't have wealth tax. Imagine that you have 2 million net worth and one home. Basically, if there was no 100% rebate in Madrid, you would be paying 3,000 euros. But since there is a 100% relief or rebate, you pay zero. In Valencia, there is no 100% relief, but the threshold is higher than Catalonia. You would be paying 3,500 euros, and you would pay them effectively. And in Catalonia, you would pay more than double than that, because the threshold to start this tax is much lower than in Valencia. It's only 500,000 euros. So yes, there are very strong implications on where you decide to move. Now let's talk about digital nomads. What about taxes for digital nomads in Spain? And if you're moving as a teleworker to Spain using the digital nomad visa scheme, there's two ways you can move: as an employee working for a company, or as a contractor or 1099 in the US. Now, if you move as an employee, first of all, you could be potentially eligible for the Beckham law if you haven't resided in Spain for the previous 5 years and other conditions. It's important that you have to provide a certificate of coverage from your home country Social Security, or COC. In the UK, it's called the A1 form. And right now, it's important to notice that only the UK, Canada, and Russians Social Security agreements are accepted, or certificates are accepted. And the US certificate of coverage is changing all the time due to changing interpretations by the UGE, which is the office that processes these types of visas. Now, if you move to Spain as a contractor, then you don't need to provide a Social Security certificate of coverage, right? Because once you get your visa in Spain, you have to apply to become Autónomo, which is the contractor fiscal figure in Spain. And as an Autónomo, you will have to start paying your Social Security contributions in Spain, which grants you access to public healthcare system, pension, parental leave, etc., etc. Okay, so contractors also will have to start paying not only annual tax deadlines, but also quarterly payments for income, quarterly payments for VAT, and monthly payments of Social Security, as I just mentioned. And there is a very, very strong possibility that you are not eligible for the Beckham law. This is also a common case, as I mentioned before. If you arrive in the second half of the year and you spend less than 183 days in Spain, then you are not considered a tax resident in Spain unless other conditions kick in. This is a case. Someone arrives in Spain on September 2024, applies for the digital nomad visa in October, gets approved for it in November, and registers as Autónomo in December. The question of this person is, do I have to pay taxes in 2024 in Spain? I'm not a Spanish tax resident, right? So an expert of the group said, this is a particularly gray area, as you weren't resident until you got your residency card or TA card, so you weren't even officially allowed to work. You are supposed to pay tax in the country where you're physically working, so strictly speaking, on any work performed since September. As we mentioned before, Spanish non-tax residents in Spain have to pay taxes on income sourced from Spain. So technically, if you're sitting on a cafe in Spain, in Spanish territory, working on your computer and generating income, that income needs to pay tax. And how do you pay tax for that income? As a non-resident, until the following year, you become a Spanish tax resident from January 1st calendar year, right? And then you continue to pay taxes as a Spanish tax resident. It is a little bit of a gray area, and depending on the tax advisor you ask, they will come with different, let's say, opinions. But the ones who are used to already work with digital nomads, they are quite used to this situation because, of course, many people move to Spain in the second half of the year. We mentioned also that the contractors or autónomos in Spain have to pay Social Security contributions on a monthly basis, and will depend, as for the new rules agreed by the government with groups of autonomous associations, okay, they have agreed that you will be paying contributions to Social Security depending on your income, okay? So depending on your income, you will pay this amount or more per month to Social Security. As you can see there, the table, if you start at 2,000 euros, 340 euros per month, going up to 6,000 euros income, and over that, 590 euros. And of course, these quantities may also increase because the agreement between the government and these associations is that they need to increase in a period of the next 7 years, 6 years, 2032. Okay, so they will increase the contributions. Okay, and they're still discussing how much they will increase. And this is the slide where it explains it, that they will also make more categories for the Social Security contributions. There is the transition until 2031, okay? And before, the possibility of, you had the possibility as an Autónomo, let's say, to choose how much you contribute. Now you won't have the possibility to choose and contribute less or more. Now it will be dictated by the amount of earnings that you have declared. Now, if you want to know more about this visa, you can join my free webinar that I hold every 2 or 3 weeks. And this is the Digital Nomad Visa webinar. Remember, you can ask your questions anytime in the chat box in the bottom right corner of your screen. Make sure to add a question mark at the end. If you think that the information that I'm sharing with you today is helpful in any way, please leave a review on Trustpilot. There's a button on the bar on the top that will redirect it to Trustpilot. Okay, and if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure to like it, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and of course, if you have any questions, please comment below. Now, let's continue. Additional taxes in Spain. Inheritance and gift tax is a regional tax, so depending where you inherit and where those assets are located, you will be paying different amount of taxes. People say that it's cheaper to die in Madrid than doing it in Barcelona, and it is very, very true because, as we mentioned before, Barcelona is in Catalonia, and Catalonia is one of the least favorable regions in terms of taxations. It's a wonderful place to live in, but unfortunately the taxes are quite high, even for Spanish standards. Okay, and also there are reductions or exemptions depending on the, let's say, the level of familiarity between the heir and the person who is giving the assets. Okay, so this is important to consult with a lawyer who knows very well about this tax, okay, and also experts in wills, especially if you have a will overseas, okay, and you have to combine that will with a will in Spain. There are ways to do it, so that's important. Let's also mention the transfer tax, Impuesto sobre Transmisiones Patrimoniales, or ITP. Now, this is typically a tax that you pay when you purchase property in Spain. Now, if you buy real estate, there's 2 ways you buy. You buy new built property or you buy second-hand property. If you buy new built property, anywhere in Spain, you have to pay 10% VAT. If you buy second-hand property, you have to pay transfer tax, which will depend on each region. Madrid, again, is the most favorable one with only 6% transfer tax of the purchase price of a property. Andalusia is 7%, more or less. In Catalonia is around 10 or even a little bit more. Valencia also is on the higher side of the fan, let's say. And yes, it will depend where you buy the property. You will be paying more or less. Now, once you are owner of a property in Spain, obviously you need to pay property tax, which is called the IBI. Okay. Good news are that in Spain the property tax seems to be quite low when we, for example, compare with the US levels. And Americans in the Facebook groups, in Spainguru's community, they mentioned that the property tax in Spain is whatever you pay in Spain annually is what you tend to pay on a monthly basis for the same type of property in the US. Okay, of course, there are variations, but yes. Then there is also the municipal capital gains tax, not to be confused with the general capital gains tax. So we mentioned if you sell a property, an asset, if you made gains, you need to pay capital gains tax on those proceeds. But the municipal capital gains tax it's also an extra tax if you sell property in Spain. Yes, it's a local town hall tax called plusvalía municipal that you pay based on the increase in the land value. So not only you pay capital gains tax on the proceeds when you declare your income in your annual declaration, okay, in June 30th, but also when you sell the property, I think you have 1 month to pay to the local town hall a plusvalía municipal, which is quite different and generally much cheaper, okay? But I mentioned this because I see a lot of confusion between these two type of taxes. We mentioned the transfer tax. There was a lot of controversy with the Mr. Pedro Sanchez, the Prime Minister of Spain, who wants to solve the housing crisis in Spain with the different measures. And one of them was a proposal to increase the transfer tax to 100% of the purchase price to non-EU passport holders, non-residents, okay, which are only 2.7% of the total transactions in Spain. Therefore, it's not that we're gonna, if they pass this law, I don't think we're gonna have any solution to the housing crisis in Spain, especially because many of these people who are buying as non-residents, then they become residents. It's just a matter of timing, okay? But this is something that has been proposed and is being quite concerning for everybody. But I interviewed Ainhoa Manero from Stemma Abogados, expert immigration lawyer, Marco Gonzalez, is an expert tax lawyer who works with Ainhoa as well, who have explained in different videos on Spainguru's YouTube channel that it is extremely unlikely that these laws pass. These are just discussions in the ministers, with the ministers, etc. But we don't see any start to pass this law or anything, okay, or any effort to do so. So it seems to have been a political announcement. We mentioned the capital gains tax, okay? And this is especially important, this tax, because many of you are thinking of moving to Spain or are already living in Spain and have property abroad and maybe thinking to sell it, okay? So there are ways to mitigate the capital gains tax, and you need to read the different conditions that can help you mitigate it. For example, if you're selling your primary property where you have lived the previous 3 years and you use 100% of the proceeds of the sale into buying a new primary property within a period of 2 years, you can avoid paying capital gains tax, etc. And there are other ways to mitigate it. But if you can, the best way is to simply, let's say, time the moment in which you sell your home in order to sell it in a different tax year where you will become a Spanish tax resident. Also, we could say it this way. If you sell your property in 2026 and you move to Spain in 2027, in 2026, you were not a Spanish tax resident. If you sell your property, then you don't pay capital gains tax to Spanish tax authorities, okay? And then you move to Spain in 2027. Or if you sell your property on the 31st of December and you move to Spain the following day, it is the same, right? Because you fall into different tax years. Now, other situation would be that in January, you sell your home, in March, you obtain your visa, or April, then you have to make sure that you spend less than 183 days during that calendar year. Therefore, if you move on the 2nd of July and you haven't been a single day during that same calendar year in Spain before, you are on the safe side because you will only be able to stay in Spain for 182 days, which is below the threshold of the first condition to become a Spanish tax resident. Therefore, you wouldn't be paying capital gains tax on the sale of that property. Now, if you have to pay it, the tax rates range from 19% to 30%. We saw that this is investment type of income under the income tax, okay? And it has also progressive tax breaks. So the same way that we calculated before, this here is an purchase a property for 100,000 euros, you sold it for 200, you made a capital gain of 100K, you apply the progressive tax rate, you will be paying an effective tax rate of around 22%. That is 22,000 euros that you could potentially save if you avoid paying this tax. course, doing everything lawfully and following all the rules. Now, let's talk about retiring in Spain. Is your pension taxable? Yes, it is taxed if you're a Spanish tax resident, and the threshold for declaring the pensions, if you have a sole income source, is 22,000 euros annual threshold, then you need to declare. But if you have multiple income sources, it goes down to 12,000 euros aggregate income and only 1,500 euros from secondary sources. Hence, here's the trick. Pensions from abroad appear as a second payer, so if they are greater than 1,500 euros, a declaration must be made, and the general progressive tax rates from 19% to 47% will apply. Now, thanks to the double taxation agreements between the US, UK, and many other countries, generally, as we said, Social Security and private pensions are taxable, but government pensions or public pensions are exempt. Okay? Now, some people say that if you are American, you're receiving your government pension, therefore you're not paying taxes on it in Spain, thanks to the double taxation agreement. If you spend 10 years in Spain, then you apply for Spanish citizenship, you become Spanish, and since you need to technically renounce your US citizenship, you can no longer benefit from the double taxation agreement. But it is not clear that that's the case from a tax perspective, okay? So yes, always important, if you're in that situation, to consult with an immigration lawyer and also with a tax advisor. The allowances for pensioners ages 65 to 74 are 6,700 euros annual allowance, and over 7,500 euros, over 75 years of age, 8,100 annual allowance. So these are allowances that you can take from the taxable income, from the general income to get to the taxable income amount. Now let's talk about taxation of American 401k and Roth IRA in Spain. 401k taxation in Spain, the distributions are taxed as general income and traditionally exempt from Modelo 720 or overseas assets declaration. But be careful because there may be different or evolving interpretations from the tax authorities. Under Roth IRA taxation, investment gains are taxed as income at progressive rates up to 30%. This is investment. Must be reported on the Modelo 720 of overseas assets declaration annually, and the value should be based on the account surrender value as of December 31st. And this could also be subject to wealth tax with rates varying by region, as we saw. There's something important to mention, that there has been a consulta vinculante, there's the code, where an individual has asked the tax authorities, asking whether the IRAs and the 401ks should be included in the Form 720, and the Spanish tax authorities said that yes, they should be, but there's something we need to remember, that the Spanish tax authorities are not judges, okay? And they may have varying interpretations that may be correct or not under the law. But we have this document there that you can read, that eventually points us out that we need to comply in that direction. Of course, check with your tax advisor, expert tax advisor, who understands the nature of the 401ks, Roth IRAs from the US, because these don't exist in Spain, and usually Spain tends to overlook the tax, let's say, benefits of those type of instruments. But yes, always check with an advisor about this. Now let's talk about non-lucrative visa. Do I have to become a tax resident in order to renew my non-lucrative visa? This is quite new because on May 20th, 2025, a new Reglamento de Extranjería, or new, let's say, regulation of the main organic law took effect on May 20th, 2025, and it was included in it a minimum stay of 183 days in order to renew the non-lucrative visa and any other temporary visa in Spain. However, and I have videos with Ainhoa Manero, expert immigration lawyer, on Spainguru's YouTube channel, that she explains that there is a Supreme Court ruling saying that a minimum stay requirement cannot be included in a low hierarchy law like the bylaw or Reglamento de Extranjería, and should only be included in the main organic law. Therefore, it is not enforceable. So, and another important thing is that it refers to the natural immigration year and not to the tax year, which is a calendar year. So in short, you don't have to become a tax resident in order to renew your non-lucrative visa. It's also important that if you plan to stay in Spain for the long term and go for long-term residency or potentially citizenship with a 2-year fast track, or after the general terms of 10 years of residency, then you have to observe the minimum stays requirements for all those situations. But let's say that if you just want to renew your NLV, you don't have to become a tax resident, or if they deny you because of that, you have a very strong case because you have a Supreme Court jurisprudence on your side. Okay, and you can watch more a video about this where I ask specifically Ainhoa Manero about this, and I talk a lot about it in my Spanish Non-Lucrative Visa webinar that is free and you can join anytime. Now let's put everything together into one single sheet. I know it's a lot of information only to include in one page, but we'll try to do it, okay? You can watch also this in the recording and read it again. But basically, this is what we talked about today. First of all, tax residency in Spain, the 3 conditions: more than 183 days physically in Spain in a calendar year, doesn't matter immigration status, days don't need to be consecutive. Second, if your main income source is from Spain. Third, if your family lives in Spain. If you're a non-tax resident, you need to pay taxes only on your income source in Spain. If you're a Spanish tax resident, you pay you pay taxes on your global income and potentially the net value of your assets. Then key tax obligations: overseas assets reporting, which is Modelo 720, March 31st for each category that is over 50,000 euros. Among those, you have bank accounts, investment, real estate. You also have cryptocurrencies with Modelo 721, and the updates following years only if there are more than 20,000 euros variations or asset closures. Personal income tax, ordinary income, progressive tax rates from 19% to 47%. Investment income, maximum 30%. The deadline for the annual declaration is June 30th, but if you're a contractor, you also have to pay on a quarterly basis. Then you have the regional wealth tax and the national solidarity tax. The regional wealth tax, it depends where you move, whether you pay it or not, okay? And the solidarity tax kicks in at a higher threshold nationally of 3 million euros plus allowances and deductions, okay? Remember that Madrid and Andalusia have a 100% rebate on the wealth tax. And then we also mentioned the special tax regime, also known as Beckham law, where you pay a flat rate of 24% on your worldwide employment income, but you don't have to pay other types, non-Spanish income, other types of income. You don't pay taxes outside of Spain, no obligation of paying Modelo 720 or wealth tax. You don't need to do many different things, okay, many advantages. But if you are a self-employed individual or Autónomo, you potentially may not be eligible, okay? Very, very high chances. Then taxation of pensions, specifically for US and UK nationals. Social Security and private pensions are taxable, but government or public pensions may be exempt thanks to the double taxation agreement, okay? Taxation of US investment accounts. 401ks is taxed as general income with progressive tax rates up to 47%. Roth IRA investment gains taxed up to 30%, and Modelo 720 reporting may be required for Roth IRAs and potentially for 401ks. Taxes for digital nomads. As employees, you are subject to Spanish Social Security if employer has no local presence. So either you present a certificate of coverage from your home country Social Security, or potentially you could switch to a contractor. Then you have to register as Autónomo in Spain, pay Social Security on a monthly basis. They will enable you access to public healthcare system and more stuff. And also you have to pay taxes on an annual and quarterly basis, okay? Then we mentioned additional taxes like in regional inheritance and gift tax, property tax, transfer tax for secondhand properties, general VAT 10% for new build properties, capital gains tax. We saw the difference with plusvalía municipal, okay? And remember the deadlines. The 720 form, very soon, March 31st. Personal income tax, annual, June 30th. Wealth tax, also June 30th. Solidarity tax, July 31st. And if you're a contractor, quarterly payments, okay, for income, VAT, and monthly payments or social security. Remember that you can always find on Spainguru.es personally vetted tax advisors, financial planners, immigration experts. At least I highly recommend you to engage with professionals of those fields. They don't have to be my recommended ones. Just this is a general advice for you if you're planning to move to Spain. It's very, very important to understand that your individual circumstances can have a very, very strong influence on whether you'll be paying this or that amount of taxes. So it's very, very important also to have a strategy designed, especially if you're planning to stay in Spain for the longer term, to structure the way you have your investments, the way that, and also it can help you to decide where to move in Spain. As you can see, Spain is a federal country with big differences depending on where you move. So this is very important in my opinion. If you choose to engage with my professional recommendations, of course, you're welcome to do it. I have been recommending them for several years and you're in very, very good hands. And of course, you can find many more services if you're planning to apply for visas or moving to Spain, you even moving with dogs, all the general and auxiliary services like health insurance, medical certificate, translation, apostille services, bank accounts, mortgages, money transfer services, pet transportation, shipping, containers, everything you can find on Spainguru.es. Have been vetting over the years personally all those services. Join my free webinars every 2 to 3 weeks and stay in touch. My email is hello@spainguru.es. Remember, the content of this webinar is for information purposes only and it's not tax or legal advice. Please consult with an experienced tax advisor. And now let's go with the Q&A session. If you have to leave earlier, remember, please leave a review on Trustpilot. There's a button on the top that will redirect you there. And let's go with the questions. Remember, I'm not a tax advisor. Okay, and this is not tax advice or legal advice. So take it all with a pinch of salt. Thank you for joining today and asking questions. I moved to Spain for my job in November 2025 and began earning income at that time. Am I considered a tax resident for 2025, even though I only earned 6 weeks of income? I think we addressed this. So, you know, as also I mentioned before, becoming a Spanish tax resident is not a black and white situation. Okay, so it's always good to enable to engage with a expert tax advisor who will study the specific situation to make sure that the tax authorities will or will not consider you tax resident on a certain time. Okay, but the case that we saw here in this presentation is that income that was earned in Spanish soil should pay at least tax as a Spanish, as a non-resident, okay, as a tax non-resident. So this, of course, can depend on your specific circumstances. Can you recommend a reliable lawyer or someone who is reliable who can handle our citizenship application and general inquiries? Of course I can. And this is also one of them is my personal recommendation because I am originally from Argentina. I also got the Spanish citizenship and I use one of the lawyers that I recommend. I have been recommending for several years. You just go to Spainguru.es, services. If you push on services, you have all the services here. Yes. But if you go on the menu, immigration lawyers, and here you have 3 recommended lawyers. I personally used Stern Abogado for my citizenship application. This is one of their strengths. They do this every single day, and they're very good in my opinion. So yeah, this is one of my recommendations, but of course you can use any of these 3, and they can help you out with that procedure. Let's go with the next question. If we move to Spain in mid-June, but then spend 3 weeks in Portugal, France, etc., would we not be tax residents for this year? How do we demonstrate that we were in the other country? Or is it better to go to the USA for the 3 weeks? So this is the thing. And this is what I see and hear and read from Spainguru's community. The days don't need to be consecutive for the threshold of 183 days of physical presence, right? So it is important that you keep all the proof. If you have the slightest doubt that the Spanish tax authorities could deem you to become a Spanish tax resident, it's important that if you are required, if they send you a notification, if they say, oh, you became a Spanish tax resident in this year because you, under our records, you are in Spain, you have never left, yes, then you would go with documentation proving that you haven't been in Spain. okay, that you haven't been in Spain. This is very important, okay? And also proving that any of the other conditions also kicked in, okay? Because staying more than 183 days is one of the three conditions, okay? But it could be other reasons for the tax authorities to consider you to be a Spanish tax resident, okay? So if you're in this situation, always keep all the proof, okay? Make sure that you can prove that you have been less than that amount of time, okay? And of course, it's always good to prepare this with the tax advisors who can review your proof, okay, and check that everything is fine so you can be sleeping without getting nervous about this. This is important. I purchased an apartment in Sitges in October 2025 to rent out until I move there in 2027. Congratulations on that. The apartment is being renovated, so it won't be rentable until March 2026. Do I need to fill out Spanish tax form 210 for imputed rental income for missed rental income tax, even though it wasn't ready to be rented in 2025? So yes, it's true that Spanish tax authorities, they charge you a tax, okay, because if the apartment has been too long empty, let's say, they start charging you a tax. That depends on the land value of your property, etc., etc. So there are regional variations for this, if I'm not wrong. But this is not really a bit too specific for me, and I'm not very sure how this works. What I understand is that if your property has been empty a certain period of time, I think it's more than 1 year or something like that, but don't quote me on this, okay? You have to start paying a tax automatically. The authorities will charge you a tax for that property because they will understand that the property is being occupied somehow or is being rented out in the black market or something. I don't know the legal sustain of this tax, honestly, but yes, that tax occurs. So I don't believe that for so little amount of months a tax should be charged, but I'm not 100% sure. This is something that you should review with a gestor, especially you are talking about 2026, so it's not until June 2027 that you need to file this income tax, okay? So potentially you will have a gestor, a tax accountant, to file you that income tax in 2027 for the income in 2026. And you can tell to the gestor, look, I didn't rent this the first months, okay, and that's it. This is the situation, and the gestor will calculate whether you have any tax chargeable because of that period of time. But in any case, I think if anything, it will not be very high at all, okay, hopefully. If I ship household items to Spain, do I need to pay VAT on the items? Okay, so this is customs, right? This is customs, and it depends, I think, on the country where you send it, and it is quite complicated. It is quite complicated, this. So I hear a lot of people asking in the group, like, the customs require me to pay VAT on these items, etc. So you need to prove that those items, you have owned them for a certain time before sending them, etc., and give some, a lot of paperwork, and then you can ship them without having to pay the tax. Spainguru customs. Let's see. Envío a Canadá, España. Sorry, I'm searching as I speak. Import, export, export. So yes, basically, yes, I have here a video, which is this one. Shipping companies require this when exporting items to Spain. Okay. So I will put it in the chat. I will put the link to the video. Maybe this helps you start your quest to understand the different requirements. Okay, and here's the link to the blog post in the description. Okay, that may be helpful. But of course, none of this is legal advice. This is important, and potentially, ask other people in the groups or go with the customs officer, okay, or someone who can help you to import it. If you use, the import or shipping companies, for example, parcel shipping, I have an agreement with 5% discount with Send My Bag and international moving quotes. They should be able to help you. This one, Cirelo, if you can get up to 5 moving quotes, international moving quotes, from highly respected services around the world to bring stuff to Spain or anywhere else, and they may be helpful with this question because they know better than me the answer to it, I'm sure. So I think we made it to the end of all the questions. I really appreciate your time today. If you're watching this on YouTube, please give it a like and subscribe. If you have any questions, please comment below. And if you want to leave a review on Trustpilot, there's the button on the top that will redirect you there. It only takes 5 seconds, and it really makes me super happy and helps others find this content. Really appreciate today that you've been here. I will send you a recording very, very soon. And thank you so much also for asking questions. And yes, always reach me out at hello@spainguru.es with anything you need. I always answer my emails, and at least with links, articles, videos, and my personal opinion. And yes, I wish you a very, very good beginning of 2026. Stay in touch, and good luck. Bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you all.
Oh, and one more thing. Apparently YouTube says you're gonna love watching this video right here. I think you should watch it.